Joe, an outright bludgeoning in Happy Valley as the Penn State Nittany Lions take down the SMU Mustangs in what both of us had previewed and had determined what was going to happen has happened in Happy Valley. Your thoughts on the game?
So I know that you and I are going to have a lot to talk about of SMU not belonging here. And before we jump to that, because I think that, you know, our emotions are certainly going to come into play of discussing that part. I just want to give credit to the winner in the way that Penn State played in this game. They started a little bit slow on offense. I'm going to touch on that in one quick second. The defensive performance that they had was a masterclass. They knew that they had such a massive athletic advantage over them, especially for Penn State's defensive line going up against SMU's offensive line. They could not do anything to block them. And there were some instances where they had a couple of nice plays, and this is a well-schemed offense that they're going to be able to create and find some of those spots. But eventually, their contain was so good that Kevin Jennings started to roam around, and then it was, no one's open. And Kevin Jennings' decision-making was awful, and they took advantage of that. They needed a spark early because Penn State's offense was really slow to get going, and the defense provided that with 14 points, long pick six returns that they were able to put on the field. My last bit here, Blake, on Penn State, they're not going to run into this issue against Boise State, but if Penn State has legitimate desires to win a national title and that they think they can do it, they have to start faster on offense. They can't keep doing this where they come out on just a totally clunky approach, misfiring, getting stopped at the line of scrimmage, not connecting with receivers, not setting up guys in space. It was all over the place for them offensively. I need to see more concentration, more focus. Otherwise, that game between Notre Dame or Georgia could end up getting not ugly, but could completely get knocked out of their hands before it could get going.
I don't disagree with that, but I mean, there comes a part where I sit there and say, okay, well, you may be right, but I mean, what are we trying to say here? That the two drives that they had early in the game didn't produce points, so then therefore, like, their defense can't play complimentary football and pick them up? I mean, and they did. They had two pick sixes. So I understand what you're saying there, but I'm not going to freak out over – I mean, look, man, we've seen them do it against some really good football teams. I get what you're trying to say there, and I don't necessarily disagree. But, man, I mean, like, 20-degree weather, 0-degree wind chill. I mean, like, I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm like, well, why can't their defense make stops too, which they did? And then two pick sixes that came early in the game. And listen, more than anything, okay, I want to talk about this in reference to the game first before I lose my mind on the other stuff. It was just an outright domination up front. And that's the difference. When you talk about, Joe, teams like Penn State or teams in the Big Ten or teams in the SEC versus teams that are in these other conferences. And you tweeted this out earlier in the game that Abdul Carter's not being blocked. Joe, not only was he not being blocked, they weren't even attempting to. They stopped because he was killing them, right? Yeah. Like the effort wasn't there. They mentally broke early.
He was one-on-one. The hilarious part is that it was one-on-one. I want to look at the film in this, but like it did not look like they did anything to double team him.
Well, they would chip him some, but even when they would chip him some, it didn't do anything. And you're letting a 180-pound back try to chip him, which is stupid in and of itself, and you have a slow left and right tackle that can't get off the ball. The thing, though, here is I thought Rhett Lashley, for what it's worth, called a good game. Jennings couldn't execute. Like, for example, maybe the first interception, maybe he should have ran for a first down, or here's just something, Drew. You got to catch that ball. Like, I mean, even though he threw the foot, that's got to be caught. I mean, like, I'm not trying to be rude to whoever, to the SMU. That's got to be caught for a touchdown.
If you're being rude or not, it's playoff football. Catch the damn ball.
Okay, well, catch the ball then.
Yeah.
So I thought Rhett called a good game. He just doesn't have the dudes. And Penn State did exactly what we thought that they would do. And, Joe, quite honestly, here's the thing. I'm going to say this too, because I wanted to say this, you know, and I kind of prefaced myself all week in saying this so I can come in here and defend James Franklin a little bit. We look at James Franklin and go, oh, he doesn't live up. No, they always are a solid football team. The thing is that they can't get over the hump against specific teams that are a little bit more talented than them. This was never a contest and never was going to be a contest. So I look at Penn State, I look at SMU and say, from the very beginning, it was that. Now, the way that they dominated at the line of scrimmage, I mean, holding them to SMU to the rushing yards that they did is absolutely insane. But here's the thing for me, Joe. I am pretty mad. I'm very mad because me and you break down college football all year long. We don't talk about anything else. We don't scatter and talk about the NFL, maybe sparingly about some draft stuff and here and there, maybe very rarely. But we break it down, and we knew this coming in. We knew this about Indiana coming in. We are going to know this about, wait for it, Arizona State and Boise State coming into this. So I look at this whole situation and say to myself, you expanded it for what? A preseason game? That's what you're expanding this for. And so for me as the consumer and for me as a college football fan and someone whose literal job, who sacrificed everything to come in here, Joe, there's no way they broke these games down with SMU. There's no way. Because anybody that watched them throughout the season knew what was about to happen. And so I look at this and say, I'm glad that there's an expanded playoff in the sense of that we could get competitive games. You can't convince me, nor can you convince me or anybody with a logical brain. And I know that Lane Kiffin's out there and they shouldn't have lost to Kentucky and Florida, so on and so forth. Schedules aren't created equally. When you're playing Dookie Water State and Tomato Can State, it's not the same as going on the road in Gainesville. It's just simply not. So when I look at this game, Joe, every time Tyler Warren caught a pass today for Penn State, I got pissed off because there's nobody that could guard him. No. Nobody at the second level or at safety that guarded him all day.
5'11" linebackers trying to cover him.
Joe, not only is he 5'11", he's 255 pounds. The dude can't run. So again, this is what I don't want to come in here and be mad about it. Penn State dominated from the first whistle on. They literally had linebackers. Newsflash. Penn State had linebackers that was juking wide receivers and running backs in the open field during pick sixes.
I think that's the real way to sum it up here. And look, when we were having arguments of who belonged in the playoff field and who belonged being seated where, there were certain things that I was willing to go to bat for. SMU was the one that I thought was egregious. Like, this was total bullshit that they were in the playoff field. If we watched them play the way that they did against Clemson, and I wish they had gotten blown out by Clemson and Clemson didn't let them get back into the game, if that had come to fruition, maybe our opinion in the committee's opinion would have changed. They would have made this mistake. But nothing that they did this entire year, they weren't like, at least Indiana blew out their schedule. SMU didn't have that. SMU had a bunch of games on their freaking resume where they're, going toe-to-toe with Duke because they turned the ball over 6 times. Nothing that they did was impressive this entire year. Their singular loss came to an overrated, mediocre BYU team that everybody convinced themselves was going to be really good this year, and they weren't. I completely agree with you. That part about this is that there needs to be, we don't have a problem with there being a 12-team expanded playoff. We have a problem with the evaluation process not factoring in teams that aren't playing anybody. I don't mind. Wait a second. I don't mind fully, and I know that we had the conversation last night about Indiana. I don't mind the premise of Indiana maybe sneaking their way in and being the last team into the mix because they have one loss in the second hardest conference in college football. But for SMU to be placed in here and for them to show up and look like a G5 team is a farce and is a complete just black mark all over this entire situation and this entire playoff field. It makes the whole thing look like a joke when it's not.
Well, people are going to say you can't blame the committee because it's the rules that we live in. The rules that we live in does not dictate that you have to rank Boise State and Arizona State where you did.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And I know those two teams haven't played. But, Joe, there's no way that you can watch. There's no way you can watch Ole Miss's D-line, South Carolina's D-line, and what South Carolina's done. Or, quite honestly, if we're being frank, what Alabama in moments has done on the road. Like, we win or losses. And here would be my thought on this, okay? Just because a team has 2 more losses doesn't mean that they're not going through and not a better football team or that they haven't accomplished more. It doesn't mean that. Wins and losses mean nothing in an expanded playoff run like this. And here's the thing, too. I've been holding on to this for months, and I told you I was going to come with it. Here it is. You told me about SMU, and this was the logic floating around there, that SMU can't be penalized for playing in a championship game if they lose. Georgia and Kirby Smart go knock, knock, knock. Because last year, that's exactly what happened to them, and they hadn't lost a game in 3 years in the regular season. They lost a post, and you penalized. Blake, it's a 14 playoff. You can't convince me. You can't convince me that they deserve to be out because a Big 12 champion in Texas won. They beat Alabama. So what? You knew who was the better team. And so I can't even break the game down. Joe, what do you want me to break down? That Drew Allar is shaking dudes in the middle of the field? Like, is that where we are as a program? Is that where we are? Drew Allar is fucking literally shaking safeties in the middle of the field. I told you I was going to be pissed about this. What are we doing?
I don't disagree with you. I don't. And you're right. There's not really much to react to this game.
Playoff committee member, I'm throwing a can of Zen at their ass. That's exactly what I'm doing.
Well, hopefully these other games aren't as
well. I mean, look,
as bad.
Let's call it what it is. Okay, I don't think Penn State played clean football. Here's what I do know. I knew that since they were running for 200 yards against Big Ten teams, that they would do exactly the same thing against SMU. Blues Clues. They did it again.
My final thought on this, and I tweeted this out, and you and I were texting about it.
Sorry for the Blues Clues reference. Now you know what my 2-year-old daughter watches.
Boise State's going to get smoked, and I don't know how anyone can look at what just happened and think that Boise State's not better than SMU by a significant margin. They've got a really good player in Ashton Jeanty, but their roster's weaker than SMU's. Their offensive line, their quarterback, everything. You know what Penn State's going to do? What they did in this game? They're going to load the box. More so than what they did in this game. They're going to load the box and just say, you know what? If you really think you can throw the ball, try. And they're going to get interceptions. My last bit with this, I really freaking hope that game is like 65-10. I really hope that James Franklin doesn't put the backups in. I hope that he runs up the score because that is where the reality check needs to come in.
To prove a point.
Yes.
I hope Texas or Clemson does that against Arizona State. Really, I do.
The Boise State thing to me is more of proving a point than anything because there's a lot of people that think Boise State is this competitive team when the separation gap between G5 and Power 4 is huge.
The only reason I'm not talking about Boise State is because of the Oregon situation. Right, I'm holding off.
But that was week 2. Teams get so much better. That was the bad version of Oregon.
I understand that.
Put Idaho in the playoff.
But Arizona's. Well, I mean,
Idaho got dog walked by Montana State, and we think that
I didn't even know that they were in the playoff. But regardless, Arizona State has 2 losses. So, for an example, these automatic qualifiers. That's the biggest issue here. We got to do something about it because there's no way that I don't want to see South Carolina. I want to see South Carolina versus Penn State. I want to see Ole Miss versus Notre Dame. I want to see Alabama versus Notre Dame or Alabama versus Penn State. I don't want to see these teams. Joe, Indiana beat one team above 500 all year. I'm going to continue to preach this. One team. By the way, Alabama had 4 in a month. 4 in a month.
Yeah.
That's the part that I'm trying to make here. They lost to Florida. I mean, I get what we're trying to say. I understand it. And you got to win games. But the logic is so dumb. All right, Penn State, congratulations. You absolutely ran over God, Brett Leslie's going to hate me. I love him to death. I thought he called a great game. He just doesn't have the dudes, man.
No.
He doesn't have the dudes. All right. We'll see you soon.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.